What happens when you put a 19-year-old in charge of setting the standard for Christian dating? Well, you get this book. That's right, I Kiss Dating Goodbye by Josh Harris. That's what we're talking about today. I'm Jacob Gooden, and this is the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. So let's kick this thing off. This is part 2 of the I Kiss Dating Goodbye series. If you missed part 1, go back. It's only a few episodes ago, okay? And it'll be linked in the show notes. I'll do that for you as well. But we talked last week on kind of what this book stems out of. We talked about the history of the Harris family, their involvement in like the Christian homeschool world, so why it plays a significant role to a lot of us homeschoolers. Because even if you didn't read this book came out. The quick history is this book came out in 1996, the year I was born, okay? It didn't cease to be published until 2019. So this book has had an influence on what is today modern day purity culture, okay? Last time we talked about part 1 of the book, and that section was called I Kiss Dating Goodbye. We talked on chapters 1 through 3, and we talked about a bunch of different stuff in there, but it was kind of setting the stage for what is the alternative to modern day dating. This week, we're going to look at part 2, which is called, let me pull it up here, The Heart of the Matter, and it's chapters 4 through 7. This week is going to touch more on like Harris's definitions of like Christian love, right, of true love versus like worldly love, okay? And he kind of brought this up in the earlier chapters where he talked a lot about how, you know, Christ's love is like this unselfish thing, and it's always giving, and it's all of these things, right? And that then worldly love is the opposite. It's selfish. It takes, and it considers nothing of the other people involved. And so we're going to see that. So, I mean, right off the rip, right? We're going to just let's get into it, okay? Chapter 4, right off the rip. Like many of the chapters in this book, he kicks it off with a story, and he tells this story of driving around with his buddy Jeff. It's summer. He's in the car with his buddy Jeff. They're driving around, and Jeff is telling him, like, oh, yeah, I've been going out with this girl, Gloria, and Josh is like, oh, yeah, I know her, you know, we're all friends, whatever, and Jeff basically confides in him, like, hey, we really like each other, and we just had sex, kind of a deal. And he's kind of looking for this, like, pat on the back, like, attaboy kind of a deal, like, get some kind of a thing. And Josh does not give that to him. He's, like, the polar opposite. He's like, well, that's not really, like, I don't think that's the right way to do things. And they kind of get in a little tiff about it, but nothing too serious. And then, like, they just part ways, okay? But at the end of telling this story, Josh talks about, you know, I come home, I'm visiting from out of town, and he's like, I run into Jeff, and Jeff is now engaged to a totally different girl, some girl named Debbie, right? So Gloria is long gone at this point. And Josh responds with, that's great, I said. My congratulations sounded hollow. I couldn't help it. I was thinking of Gloria. I hadn't seen her in a long time. What was she now? 3 or 4 girlfriends back? Love, huh? And I read this, and I was just, like, bothered by this, right? You should always be happy for your friends, right? Even if you don't agree maybe with their love choices, because I've had a few friends like that. But you should be happy that they're happy, right? You should want them to be happy. But the fact is, we're years removed from the situation with Gloria. And Josh is still hung up and can't even be happy for his friend who has moved on, let alone the fact that, like, Josh is this big advocate, right, for doing it Christ's way, doing it, like, the right way, which is get married, have sex. And his buddy Jeff is, like, going down that path. He's getting married. And Josh can't even, like, just reconcile in his brain, like, that maybe this dude has grown up. Maybe this guy has evolved and changed, right? So it's just this weird, really arguably, like, terrible friend behavior, let alone just, like, you're obsessing over something that is not your business whatsoever. We flash forward, like, a couple more pages, okay? So he talks about he calls it, in the section, he calls it Aphrodite or Christ. And he says, I cannot overemphasize the importance of gaining God's perspective on love. We can link all the negative habits of dating to adopting a fallen world's attitude towards love, and the conflict between God's definition of love and the world's is not new. Christians have always had a choice to either imitate the master or slip into the more enticing pattern of love provided by the world. But again, Josh is equating like love as this like purely selfish thing. He's equating it to like basically sex, always. He basically is like, if you're not a Christian, love is only selfish. It is only self-serving. He later goes on to talk about this on page 62. And he says, first, we must understand that all of the world's deceptions flow from the belief that love is primarily for the fulfillment and comfort of self. The world poisons love by focusing on meeting one's own needs first and foremost. We witness this poison in the boyfriend or girlfriend who pressures their partner into sex. You've heard the line, if you really loved me, you'd do it. In other words, I don't care about you or your convictions or how this could damage you emotionally. Meet my needs. Or what about the person who dates someone because it will boost his or her popularity, but then dumps that person when someone of a higher social status comes along? Again, there are people like this. People will do these things. People are shitty, okay? It happens. But I would argue that most people, if you ask them about what love is and what real love is, they would not say this. They would not say this selfishness of throwing aside one's own needs to meet the needs of others, like only being selfish, right? We would talk about true love has this aspect of give and take, right? Like we do have things, we do have needs as humans. Christians might not know that because we are told consistently that, like, not to listen to our bodies, that our bodies are wicked and evil things, and that, like, the wants and desires of man are, like, awful, right? And it leads to this weird mentality. I talked about it in the previous episode, but, like, for me, it led to this weird, I still struggle with what pleasure is to me, right? And doing things that make me happy, whether it's sexual, whether it's just like actually like fun things of like playing a video game or reading a book or like taking time for myself, things that I need to recharge. I struggle to register when my body is telling me those things, and I've gotten better at it, but it's a slow unlearning process. Okay, it's so strange to me, like this like selfish like love thing, because I remember hearing that as a kid. I remember hearing about like that people outside of God's love really couldn't have rich, fulfilling relationships and love because they didn't know what it was to love. They didn't know what it was to like sacrifice and give up themselves. Later in the chapter, he has a section called True Love Nullifies Dating, and he has this quote in here that or he says a few things in here. He goes back to his Jeff and Gloria explanation, and he says that unfortunately they often subscribed to the world's definition of love. First, their motivation was self-centered. Jeff went out with Gloria because she was pretty to all the other guys, or she was pretty, all the other guys liked her, and she satisfied him sexually. His criteria for pursuing a relationship with her compares to his criteria for choosing a pair of jeans. They make him feel good. They make him look good. Gloria wasn't much better. So on the other hand, she liked Jeff because he was a prize. He was good looking, athletic, and he owned a nice car. They met each other's emotional and physical needs and helped each other's image. Self-centered, right? As he goes on, our entire motive is transformed when we extract the poison of self-love. Now, I want to say this because this was a note I wrote down. I read this book as if I was like 14, 15, okay? Peak puberty, sexual feelings are awakening in you. If I had read this and seen poison next to self-love, again, it feeds into this whole narrative that like, because we view self-love as selfishness, right? Now I view it much more as like self-care, right? Listening to our bodies. Sometimes you just got to take a spa day. You just got to do a facial mask. You just got to pamper yourself a little bit, right? But I would have only ever seen those words in a very negative context if this is the book I was going off of. All right, we are moving right along into chapter 5 of this book. It's called The Right Thing at the Wrong Time is the Wrong Thing, and subtitle is How to Keep Impatience from Robbing You of the Gift of Singleness. Now, the story that starts out this whole thing is he tells this parable of the magic thread and how this kid named Peter gets this magic ball of thread, okay, or this magic spool of thread or something like that. And the way the thread works is that Peter can go forward in time by pulling the thread, and it will advance him in time, okay? And so the parable goes that, he goes to class one day and he's in school and he's bored out of his mind because he doesn't want to be in school. So he tugs the thread just a little bit and he flashes forward and he's not in school anymore. And as his life goes on, he continues to pull on this thread anytime there's anything boring. He just wants the excitement. He just wants the enticing parts of life. And so he pulls the thread, and before he knows it, he's pulled all the way through his life. He's pulled the thread to the very end. Now, the thing about the thread is there's no respooling it and going back, right? It only works one way. And Josh uses this as an example, right? To be like, young people often give up their singleness in pursuit of a relationship, in pursuit of this adult thing, and how sometimes it's actually good to sit in the monotonous life, the monotonous day-to-day stuff, and I was like, interesting. I don't totally disagree with him on this. I think some of the arguments for it are a little bit dumb, but I do understand that idea of life is a series of excitement and kind of some boring times, and it's this weird up and down roller coaster, right? So I'm not going to totally disagree with the guy on all of it, but I do disagree with him on some of it, and specifically this. He talks later in the book, or talks later in this chapter, about seasons. And he says, just as spring's role is different from that of fall, so each of the seasons of our lives has a different emphasis, focus, and beauty. Totally with you, right? Life is seasons. We cannot skip ahead or experience the riches of another life season any more than a farmer can rush the spring. Each season builds on the one before it. God has many wonderful experiences he wants to give us. He also assigns those experiences to particular seasons of our lives. In our humanness, we often make the mistake of taking good things out of its appropriate season to enjoy it when we want it. Premarital sex is a prime example of this principle. Sex in itself is a wonderful experience, and he has in parentheses, from what my married friends have told me. But if we indulge in it outside of God's plan, we sin. Like a fruit picked green or a flower plucked before it blossoms, our attempts to rush God's timing can spoil the beauty of his plan for our lives. Just because something is good doesn't mean we should pursue it right now. We have to remember that the right thing at the wrong time is the wrong thing. One of the things that I struggled with growing up was God's will was talked a lot about when I was a kid. And I think I brought it up on the podcast before, but I had kind of a different view of God's will than most of my friends did. A lot of them would pray a lot, they would read the Bible a lot, and basically be asking God for this very definitive answer of do this, do that. And sometimes it was for very arbitrary stuff that I was like, this is a waste of God's time. And let me give you an example. It would be should I join this club or that club? And now, if I still believed that, God was master of the universe, of course, if I believed all the Bible stuff, I would still believe that, God even cares about those little details. My difference of opinion came from when I was young, my mom had me read the Westminster Catechism. And one of the first sections of that book, it was basically these teachings on the Bible. But one of the first sections and themes of that book was this idea that in order to do the will of God, what is the will of God? The will of God is that you glorify and honor Him, and in doing that, you get to spend eternity with Him. And I was like, interesting, okay. And so from then on, I kind of had this different view of like, I don't really need to bother God with all of the questions, of all of the like, should I do this club over that club? I should just make a decision, and if I'm doing it and I'm honoring God while doing it, and I'm being a light to the world, I'm doing the will of God. And how does this fit into what I'm talking about here? I think so many people waited for this like God to tell them, now is the time to date, right? Now is the time to do this thing. And I think Josh pushes this a lot too, because he pushes this certainty within dating, and we're gonna see more of it as we go further in the book. But he pushes this certainty of like, dating is bad because like, you should be, the person that you pursue, you should want to like pursue them for marriage and be like kind of almost certain about it. And I remember there just kind of being this, because broken hearts are bad, right? Getting hurt is bad, and hurting other people is bad. But that's just not how life always works, right? We get hurt, we get knocked down. And so I think I viewed dating in a different way, because I viewed it as like, I'm interested in this person. Let me date them. Let me meet them. Let me experience them. And Josh is going to argue you do this as friends without the romantic stuff. But I disagree. I've always disagreed on that. I think that the romantic stuff can add a seriousness to it. Like, let me give you this example. When I dated my wife, pretty early on in our relationship, we were friends before we were lovers. But when we were friends, we talked a lot about like what we want out of life. We hung out with a lot of different people. And then as we started dating, one of the things that I told her very quickly was that I was not dating to just have a girlfriend. I had an intention behind it. I wanted to get married. I wanted to find a partner. It was less about getting married. It was more about, I wanted to find someone that I wanted to do life with. And I set that intention very early in our relationship, and it didn't scare her off. She was like, I'm interested in that too. Now, we also added all of the hand-holding and the kissing, and that was an aspect of figuring out if this was the person that I was compatible with. Again, I think Christians got it wrong. They got scared of, someone along the line was like, sex equals bad. And I think Josh is one of these people where we even see in the first chapters, and I read his follow-up book to this as well. I think Josh got hurt while dating, because even though he doesn't talk about it a whole heck of a lot in the books, Josh does mention the fact that he dated a lot of girls. He kissed a lot of girls. He never lost his virginity, which I even hate that term, but he was not like a pure guy. Like he had done the thing, and then he got frustrated with it. And I think part of that is just the fact that, like, I think he got hurt one too many times, and he was like, there has to be a better way. Instead of just actively pursuing more out of it, right? And, like, actually, I don't know, maybe looking at the situation differently. And this is a little bit of an aside. This is not in my notes, but I'm realizing as I'm talking about this that I'm like, there's so many things. And Josh, I would love to have you on, and maybe I could just ask you this question, but was it that you got hurt and you were like, okay, screw this, I'm going to figure out a better way, which was like, I'm going to make it look cool to be single? Or was it an unwillingness to learn that maybe you were the problem in a lot of these relationships? Did you have areas that you needed to grow as a person to fulfill whatever it was you were going to get to? I don't think it's a bad thing to want to date somebody with the intention of marriage, with the intention of finding a life partner. I also don't think it's bad to date people with the intention of, I like having somebody to go get drinks with, to go to the movies with, to have like a partner in crime kind of person. And maybe they're not my forever person, but they're just somebody I'm vibing with currently. I don't think that any of that's bad. I just think it's all about like the intention and the communication of those things right off the rip so people don't get injured. Does that make sense? Anyway, I could ramble on this for a long time, but let's move on, okay? A few pages more, it says, while you're single, dating not only keeps us from preparing for marriage, but it can quite possibly rob us of the gift of singleness. Dating can tie us down in a series of pseudo-relationships, but God wants us to maximize our freedom and flexibility to serve Him. Any season of singleness, whether you're 16 or 26, is a gift. You just might do God a disservice by wasting its potential on a lifestyle of short-term dating. I talked about this in the last episode, but this idea that, like, when you're in a relationship, you can't, like, be serving God, right? Like, you can't be preparing for marriage is, like, really fucking weird. And I'm sorry I cursed, but, like, it's really weird, right? There's a lot that goes into marriage. There's a lot of things I didn't know that I was going to need to do as a husband that I had to learn. But some of them I learned beforehand, okay? I learned about, like, the difference of personality, right? I learned about I need to do certain things. I need to take care of my partner in certain ways that I had not ever thought of before. I learned about the fact that, like, my words held different meaning, or the tone of my voice held different meaning than maybe I intended. I still learn this on the daily. And it maybe hurt feelings or made people feel a certain way. And I don't think I would have learned those things if I wasn't... I mean, like I said, I'm still learning those today. But, like, I learned a lot of them while I was dating, while I was, like, exploring a romantic partner, was, like, the way that we interacted and the way we, like, learned how to take care of each other and what we needed, right? I brought up in my last episode that, like, I had surgery while I was dating my wife. We were not even close to being engaged. Like, I had surgery. I couldn't take care of myself. It was in an awkward part of my back, my lower back, and, like, I couldn't replace the gauze on my own. I needed help, and I needed her help because I had nobody else. My family didn't live nearby, nothing. And she could have easily been like, nah, don't do that. That's, like, not the level of our relationship. But she cared about me. And she said, no, I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to, like, do this for you. And she would push me to, when I wanted to just kind of be like, you know, do things that were, you know, the doctor was telling me, you got to take it easy. She helped hold me accountable to following doctor's orders, as opposed to me and myself. I would have been like, no, I can do X, Y, Z, and I can do this on my own, and I don't need anybody. I would have had this very independent streak inside of me. And she didn't have to do that. But I learned to accept that, and I learned to communicate better when I'm sick, what I need. And I'm a super needy patient, by the way. But I don't like this argument that he continues to make that, like, when you're in a relationship, you then, like, are, like, losing out on this opportunity to, like, learn how to be a spouse. Like, I just think that's, like, I think it's just, like, flipped, to be honest. Like you actually can't really learn how to be a spouse until you're in a relationship and you're actually having to, like, you're closing that intimacy gap, right? You're closing that gap of, like, it looks different to be intimate with friends than it does with a partner, than it even does with a spouse. Like, it's just very, very different, and that's okay. Like, and it's okay to explore that. I also wanted to bring this up because I put this in my notes again. Early on in this book, he was talking about how he wanted to go back to dating as if it was in the 1800s. Now, if we look at historically, like, dating, and we look at dating even within the Bible, one of the reasons I think the Bible doesn't talk a lot about dating is because at the time, women were, like, bought and sold, right? They came with dowries. They, like, it was, a lot of times it was these plays within families to strengthen themselves. Talk about selfish love, man. It was families' plays to like strengthen their worth, their value, their standing in society. And it's like, Josh, why are we going back to that? Because now we're coming out of that and we're coming into a place where women can have a say. Women can have a voice and they can say, I value these things in a partner. Before they couldn't do that. It was just like, dad would arrange something, mom and dad would arrange something. Or, you hear about arranged marriages. People still to this day have arranged marriages. I'm not totally knocking that, just FYI. But I think it's interesting, this push within Christianity, specifically in this book, but I think by so many, to kind of go back to this like male-dominated 1800s view of romance, as opposed to we're in a different place now. We've evolved as a society. We've changed the rules. We evolve, we change, we grow, we become better. And it just honestly feels very like patriarchal and nasty, to be quite honest. So that's chapter 5. We're going to move on to chapter 6 because, I could talk about every paragraph of this book and my disagreement or agreement with it. Most of it's disagreement. But yeah, let's jump in. Chapter 6, The Direction of Purity, subtitle, How to Get on the Road of Righteousness. This chapter, man, kicks off with a disgusting story, again. But this story, he talks about going to church camp, and he talks about the pastor that was leading the thing, saying, hey, we're going to fill out these anonymous note cards, and we're going to rank where you sit on the levels of physical intimacy and their seriousness, kind of a deal. And so he's like, hey, if you've ever like kissed somebody, so it's like a 0 to 10 system is the way he outlines it. So, 0 would be nothing, right? Done nothing. 1 is like kissing, and then 10 would be sexual intercourse. And so Josh is like, okay, so we fill them all out, we drop them in the thing, and we leave. It was like at the end of a service, and then they were going to talk about it in a future thing. And he's like, as I'm walking out, like some of the guys are all chatting about like, oh, what'd you score? And, and they're like, oh, I got to like a 6, but like almost a 7 kind of a deal. And I'm like, I'm sitting here going, weirdo behavior. Again, this is the kind of stuff, if you never went to church youth group, if you never did like the summer camps and things like that, these are the types of things that would happen at places like that, where it's like this weird like telling of things to the adults in the room, but then ultimately it's going to come down to them shaming us into feeling like wicked people, resulting in us repenting of our sins and asking God into our hearts, right? Asking for forgiveness, asking God to come live inside of us so that they can report their numbers back to the church when we get back and say, hey, 150 students committed their lives to Christ or something like that. But anyway, these are like just weird, controlling church behavior that is just like, ugh. Anyway, I wanted to also talk about this. He says, like countless Christians, my 2 friends foolishly viewed purity and impurity as separated by a fixed point. As long as you didn't cross the line and go all the way, they believed they were still pure. True purity, however, is a direction, a persistent, determined pursuit of righteousness. This direction starts in the heart, and we express it in a lifestyle that flees the opportunities of compromise. I grew up believing the same thing, that like purity was kind of this like fixed thing, right? So I talked last time about like sexual sin not being classified, right? Like of like what is too far, and everybody's definition is slightly different, but we can all agree that having premarital sex is like, that is way beyond the line and nobody should be going there, kind of a deal. And then on the lower half of it would be the kissing. I personally probably would have ranked like masturbation down on the lower part, maybe even some like pornography. I don't know. People would probably disagree with me. They'd probably be like, porn and masturbation go higher on the list. But like, I know that for me, I viewed it very much in that fixed point of like, until I had sex, I was like, I'm good. I'm good. I got this. Now, mentally, I had decided in my brain, I had determined that I was like, I think that the Bible's views on sex are wrong, or the things that I had attributed to biblical standards of sex were wrong. And I had determined that I was like, I don't think that premarital sex is sinful. Disagree, agree with me, whatever you want. I don't really give a shit. That was what I had determined. But my body was so used to being told that sex equals bad that when I did have sex that was outside of marriage, it was great in the moment, but the shame and the guilt that came after were awful. And so even though in my brain I was like telling myself, I was like, no, this is okay. Like, this is fine. Like, you should not feel guilty for this. This is like normal, natural, like you're learning, you're exploring. This is a part of the human experience. Like, you should, be enjoying it, all of these types of things. Because my body had been told so for so long that like, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. I just had so many issues with it. But when it came to anything else, I was like, well, that's not crossing that line. Like, I knew that like watching porn, maybe masturbating was sinful, but it was not like this definitive, like it almost felt like having premarital sex was like it's an instant go to hell card, right? Like in Monopoly you get the like go to jail, go directly to jail, do not pass go. Like it felt like maybe that was like the case. Like, and I've only ever really felt that way about two things inside of Christianity. One, sex is like the instant go to hell card, and homosexuality is the instant go to hell card. And it's just wrong. It's just wrong. It's like, it's just a fucked up belief, to be quite honest. And it doesn't make you less of a person. It doesn't like dehumanize you. I don't even know. Like, I can't even, the words aren't even there to express my feelings on this. But I just agree with the idea that that was what we were being taught, of like purity sits within these fixed points of like you're either all the way at a zero where you are like extremely pure because you've done nothing physical, or you're all the way over here, and then there's all this stuff in the middle, but it's all like redeemable. You can be saved from that. So without further ado, I'm not gonna ramble too much longer on that. I do want to jump ahead a few more pages to page 89, and he starts talking about good old King David. And one of the things, I'm just going to say this now because I'm going to bring this up again later, but the story of King David, this particular story with him and Bathsheba, is from 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. If you're not familiar with it, here's the Cliff Notes version. Okay, King David, king of Israel, goes out on his rooftop, sees a beautiful woman taking a bath on her rooftop in all of her nakedness, is like, I want that woman. So even though he's a married man, has multiple wives because he's king of Israel, he sends his guards to go get her, bring her to him. He seduces her. They sleep together. She gets pregnant. What he doesn't know at the time is that she is the wife of one of the generals of his army. And what ends up like happening is that he ends up killing her husband so that he can be with her. But the reason I bring up this story is one, I want to highlight something. Christians will always say like God uses imperfect people. They'll use that as an argument. David is considered by the church as one of like the guys. He is one of like the ultimate God followers, and he's a man to be respected. He's a man to be admired, to imitate, all these types of things. And I was rereading this story because I read it more than just in this book. I actually opened my Bible and read this story, and I was reminded that I'm like, this is a man who does everything that you guys disagree with. Not only does he have multiple wives, which a lot of Christians would argue is bad, he has an affair with a married woman. He gets her pregnant, and then he kills a guy as a result of it. I just don't understand the justification for King David. To be honest, I think that's the main pull from there. That it just always irks me that I'm like, why are we talking about this guy? Because I'm not going to get political. I'm just going to leave it at that. But why do we do that? It just seems dumb to me. Okay, there's plenty of other people in the Bible who are better examples, more faithful examples of their faith than King David. That's all I got. I'm going to leave it at that. I want to point out this other part of this book. It's always interesting to me. He says this in the book of Proverbs: the seductive spirit of impurity and compromise is symbolized by a wayward adulteress. We are warned that many are the victims. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. And then he goes on, he says, though King Solomon wrote these words hundreds of years ago, this woman continues to lurk all around us today. She snares the innocent with promises of pleasure, but she truly desires nothing but her victim's destruction. She has ruined countless lives, both male and female, with her treachery. And I just wrote this in my notes. I said, why does the Bible always portray like the bad guy as like a woman? Like, why is it never a guy? It's always like a woman. I don't know. Something to think about. That's all I got to say there. Next up, page 93. We're moving. Purity in action is what this section is called. I'm just going to read this. He has a bit in here. It says, respect the deep significance of physical intimacy. Many non-Christians view sex as a bodily function on the level of scratching your back. They engage in sex whenever and with whomever they want. While this lifestyle is an affront to biblical values, many Christians treat lesser expressions of physical intimacy with the same lack of respect. They view kissing, holding, fondling as no big deal. While we may hold higher standards than our pagan neighbors, I'm afraid we too have lost sight of the deeper significance of sexual intimacy. I wrote in my notes, I said, viewing sex as the same as scratching someone's back is like a wild thing to say. Like, that's how he views the world's idea of like love and sex, right? It's like we don't differentiate between like scratching your back or having sex with someone. It's all just bodily, our body is telling us we need something, so we just fulfill it. There's so much more to it than just that. Like, sex is so much of a bigger thing than just scratching your back. Like, I would argue that people view sex as a special connection between two people, and I don't think they would put it on the same level as scratching your back. Like, also, he mentions in here that he says later in this chapter, he says, physical intimacy is much more than two bodies colliding. God designed our sexuality as a physical expression of the oneness of marriage. God guards it carefully and places many stipulations on it because he considers it extremely precious. He doesn't back up this statement with any Bible verses. I mean, this whole page right here, both of these pages, I mean, there's one little Bible scripture here that says, do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray from her paths. But there's no other scripture in here that's backing up these stipulations that supposedly God has. That's why I said earlier, where the story of King David is. If you want to check it out, 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. Where's your proof? Where is your backup? That is something that I realized as I read this book. Many Christian books bet on you already having an understanding of the Bible, having already been to church, having already had this knowledge in place, to just then go along with them saying stuff like, well, we all know that this is the way God views it. We all know that this is in the Bible. Where? Tell me where. Show me where. Okay? I didn't think much of these types of things until I read When Religion Hurts You. And as I was reading it, one of the notes I took on that book was, I was like, everything is cited. There's links to everything. There's references to books and all these things. They're all listed, not only in the actual writing, But there are annotations in the corners to say, hey, go. And in the back, there's an entire reference sheet of everything that's referenced throughout the whole thing. I would respect this book, I think, a lot more if he actually had sources to back it up. And maybe sources more than just the Bible, even though this is a Christian book. Of course, the Bible is the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me, right? Like, I get it, but like, the more you just rely only on the Bible for everything, as a non-believer, it gets harder and harder to like kind of buy into the bullshit, so to speak. Because if I don't believe it, you got to hit me with other sources that maybe I respect more. That's all I'm going to say about that. Moving on, he brings up Billy Graham. Thought this was interesting. My family has a connection to Billy Graham. My grandfather used to work for Billy Graham organization. One of the things that Billy Graham historically did, and I saw this play out in my own lives as well, but in the early days of his ministry, Billy Graham experienced deep concern over the public's distrust of evangelists. How could he preach the gospel to people who assumed he was fake? As he considered this question, he realized that most people who distrusted evangelists did so because these evangelists lacked integrity, particularly in the area of sexuality. To combat this, he and his close circle of men who ran the crusades avoided opportunities to be alone with women who weren't their wives. Now, I grew up in a household and with people in my life who kind of lived by similar principles, who would leave the doors open. I had a grandfather, like I said, who worked for the Billy Graham organization. He had to follow some of these rules. Here's what I understand about this that I can kind of get behind. I understand the wanting for there to never be a question about what happens behind closed doors. I get that. Here's where I kind of disagree. I believe that this perpetuates the idea that men are uncontrollable hormone monsters. The way that purity culture is set up is so that men don't have to take accountability for their actions. And that's a really dangerous message to tell young boys, specifically. That we get to shift blame to women a lot of times for, well, they wore this thing, which results in us being like, well, they were asking for it. They, said or did this thing, or they gave me this look, and whatever. It's their fault, not mine. And so we're teaching these young men that, like, they have no self-control, right? It's unavoidable. I get really irritated by this because I know that I was that way for a long fucking time. I thought that I was just uncontrollable. And I'm thankful. I said it in episode 1. I'm going to say it again. My dad had told me that there is a time and a place for sexual things. We grew up in California. We go to the beach. You're going to see women in bikinis. He's like, the beach ain't a sexual place. We're not here to be hooking up. We're not here to be ogling. We're not here to do... It's not sexy time. And that helped. I'm not going to lie. I think it gave me a breadcrumb of learning about self-control and learning to, like, harness that. One of the things that I chose to do, and I'm just going to take ownership for all of this, is that I masturbated a lot as a teenager. I did. It's disgusting. Trigger warning if that grosses you out. I get it. It grosses me out sometimes too. I did that because the alternative was popping a boner left and right for any little thing. The wind would blow. I'd have a boner. Doing that early in the day, kind of taking care of myself, so to speak, it alleviated sometimes the embarrassment of that happening when I was with other people. And so even though I felt a lot of guilt and shame about it, right, I felt like I was on the spectrum, right? We talked earlier about the 0 to 10. Even though I felt like I was sitting in there and I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing, I chose to do that because I was like, I would rather that happen than me be embarrassed when I'm with my friends and someone comments on it, or just feel a certain way, or feel awkward because there I am. Like, men can't hide it, right? We get a boner, it's external, right? Women get turned on, you guys can hide it a little bit more, right? So I chose to do that. That was a self-control thing for me. Now, of course, I had problems with pornography. I had some issues with some of that, but it kind of helped. Like, in a weird way, it kind of helped, because when I did get to the point where I no longer viewed masturbation as bad, right? And I no longer viewed premarital sex as bad. I had learned that I also needed to have self-control. I had learned that, like, sex is not going to happen all the time, anytime the wind blows and I'm, like, wanting it, right? It's a partnered thing. It happens between two consensual people. What I started to realize was that other guys I knew were not that way. They were pressuring women into having sex. They were pressuring women into giving them hand jobs and blow jobs and, like, getting them off. They were, like, uncontrollable, and they would, like I said, we would be at things and, like, it was just whatever. But they wrote it off as, like, well, that's just me. That's just guys being guys. And, you know, and then making gross comments about things that women would wear and, like, all of these things. And they would write it off as, like, that's just dudes being dudes, and that's, like, what we're supposed to do. It's like, no, it's not fucking what we're supposed to do. Like, we are supposed to be gentlemen. We are supposed to know the time and the place, the appropriate measures to take in these circumstances. And it just irks me when I see these things, and we're going to get into it even more, because, I mean, the next section of this book is, like, guys versus girls responsibilities. And, like, I mean, literally, he lists all these things that are, like, the guy's responsibility, right? He's like, guys, it's time we stood up to defend the honor and righteousness of our sisters. We need to stop acting like hunters trying to catch girls and begin seeing ourselves as warriors standing guard over them. How do we do this? We must first realize that girls don't struggle with the same temptations we struggle with. We wrestle more with our sex drives, while girls struggle more with their emotions. We can help guard their hearts by being sincere and honest in our communication. We need to swear off flirtation and refuse to play games that lead them on. We have to go out of our way to make sure nothing we say or do stirs up inappropriate feelings or expectations. A few things I want to say on this. One, of course, I would argue it's a good thing to be a man that's willing to stand up for a woman. I think most, I'm not going to say everybody, but I think most people would argue that that is a good thing. The thing that I disagree with is, like, down here it talks about we wrestle more with sex drives while girls struggle more with their emotions. I don't think that's true. I think that we are at a point where men have been programmed for so long that our emotions are, like, negative things, and we shove them deep down inside. Like, we don't cry, we don't show weakness. Our emotions are weakness, right? We've been told that lie for centuries at this point, and it's just programmed into us that, like, emotions equal weak, and thus, because women are emotional and women tend to be more in touch with their emotions, they're the weaker species. I think it's the polar opposite. Like, I genuinely met a point in my life where I'm like, I think it's the polar opposite, because, like, I will be burning up inside with emotions and unable to cry, unable to do things, because I just haven't gotten there yet in my therapy and growing as a human being, because I struggle to do those things. I struggle to show emotion because it still registers in my brain as weakness. So even though, again, mentally, I can tell myself, it's okay. You can cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel this emotion. There's a part of me that's like, but that's not manly. That's, like, weakness kind of a thing. What he doesn't mention in this section is dressing appropriately. He mentions nothing about clothes for the men. But yet when we get to the girls section, It says, girls, you have an equally important role. Remember the wayward woman we discussed earlier. Your job is to keep your brothers from being led astray by her charms. Please be aware of how easily your actions and glances can stir up lust in a guy's mind. You must realize that guys most commonly struggle with our eyes. I think many girls are innocently unaware of the difficulty of a guy has to remain pure when looking at a girl who is dressed immodestly. Now, I don't want to dictate your wardrobe, but honestly speaking, I would be blessed if girls considered more than fashion when shopping for clothes. Bro wants girls to dress like they're in the 1800s. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you, Josh Harris? You're going to sit here and you're going to be like, one, you're going to spew off bullshit about women being more emotional than men, when that's just programming that needs to be broken down. And then you're going to say that men struggle more with their sex drive than women do. I've talked to enough girls at this point about their fucking teenage years and being horny all the time and whatever. Like, again, as men, we can't hide it. We have an exterior appendage, right? As penis havers, we have an exterior appendage, right? For the vagina havers, you guys can hide it. But you put everything on the girls of like, you know, when you dress a certain way and you act a certain way and you flirt a certain way, it makes guys fall into temptation, into lust. And yet the guys take no responsibility of this. I mean, like, we're taught that, like, we have two options in those circumstances. We either give in to that emotion of, like, lusting after a woman, or we run, like, extremely far away. And I just think that there's there's a middle ground in there where it's learning to, like, accept that the situation isn't sexual, and that's not running away. It's not removing yourself from the situation. It's recognizing. It's a recognition as men, as penis havers, that like this is not a sexual situation, and I'm not going to make it that. Okay, women, you are allowed to wear what you want. Okay, you like dress how you want. Like, just do it. He also doesn't talk about the fact that, like, as guys, we wear clothes that maybe turn girls on, right? I could go on and on and on about this. I don't have the time to do that, okay? So we're going to move on. Chapter 7, last chapter. It's called The Cleansed Past, The Room, How Jesus Can Redeem Your Past. He kicks it off talking, again, in a story. He talks about the room. This is where the title comes from. And he shares kind of having a dream, and he wakes up in this room, and in this room there's all these kind of like mini file cabinets for index cards, okay? And each one is labeled, right? And so there's different things in there, like one says friends, and then the next one too, it says like friends I have betrayed, and then he's got other stuff that's like books I've read, lies I've told, comfort I've given, yada, yada, yada. And then he gets to one that's called songs I've listened to, and this is what he says. I realized that when you pull it out, that it would expand to meet like however many cards were in there, right? And so the cards were packed so tightly, and yet after 2 to 3 yards, I hadn't found the end of the file. I shut it, shamed, not so much at the quality of music, but more by the vast amount of time I knew that file represented. He feels shame for time spent listening to music. Because you know what? That time could have been spent preparing for marriage. Or could have been spent glorifying God in some way. Or could have been spent, like, that's his argument as he gets down here. That's his argument, is that what if I hadn't have wasted all of this time on all this other stuff, on living life, right? Living life, being a normal human being. What if I had not wasted all my time on these things, and instead I had just solely focused on God? I'm sorry, but what a boring life it's going to be if all you ever do is read the Bible, pray to God. Like, I'm sorry, that's not exciting. We are meant to do so much more than that. We set the intention of what we want our life to be. We set value to things. We set intentions of the things we want to accomplish and do, and what the impact is that we want to make in life, and the messaging that we want to leave behind for the next generation of people. And as I read this, it made me really upset because it reminded me so much of my relationship with my grandfather, and how, like I said, my grandfather worked for the big grant organization. He had some seminary degrees, or had gone to seminary multiple times. He was a chaplain. He was never a pastor, as far as I know, but he was a chaplain. And so when I graduated high school and I went to college, I went to a Christian college, but I was not studying religion. And he would always tell me when I would talk to him, you should consider getting a minor in religion, or you should just double major. And then he's like, when you're done, you should go to Asbury Seminary and get, a full seminary degree. And I was like, that's not really what I want to do, Grandpa. Like, that's not intriguing to me. It's not interesting to me. And he's like, yeah, but it's like a good thing to have in your back pocket. So when you like become a pastor, whatever. And I was like, I don't want to be a pastor. I don't want to do that. So the value there was just not there for me. But also, one of the things that we disagreed on so adamantly was the idea of what evangelism looked like. And he would talk about going out and preaching to the people and all of these types of things, and standing on stages and shouting, the words of God and whatever. And my view on it has always been relationship-based. It's always been about meeting people where they're at, not pushing God down their throat. And this is still, I think, how I live my life too, of just like, you can't always just start the relationship with like, well, what do you believe? Well, this is what I believe. Like, it takes a while. You got to ask the dumb questions. You got to ask the like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite day of the week? Like, you got to get through those questions, the dumbass questions, to get to know somebody and to get to have a relationship with that person. That's why I think Josh's take on this is so garbage, right? He's sitting there pulling out this box, and it's all the songs he's ever listened to, and he's upset because he's like, I could have spent this time doing something so much greater for God. What if those songs come up in having these conversations with people, right? You meet somebody who is a music aficionado, right? And you can list off all these bands you've listened to. You can list out all these things, who produced and who did that and yada, 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 right? All of these things, right? You can have a conversation with people. And that's why I'm such a big advocate for like, have the things that you're passionate about and like learn them really well. And like, I talk about this all the time within the homeschooling world of just like, my parents knew that I loved pirates, and they built a whole curriculum around me loving pirates, and they pushed me to learn that, right? When I got really into music, I learned a ton about music. They allowed me to listen to like Eric Clapton and B.B. King and all these guys that they might not have agreed with everything they did. I mean, are you kidding me? Eric Clapton has a song called Cocaine that's about doing cocaine. Like, I'm so sick and tired of this like thought process of like, it's such a waste of time to do anything outside of basically like study the Bible. Because like, I'm at a point in my life where like, I think I view a lot of evangelism as somewhat of a pyramid scheme. Now, I'm saying evangelism and not Christianity because I think they can be separate things, okay? They go hand in hand, but I think they can be separate things. So I just want to say that. I want to clarify that. So when I talk about evangelism, I view it now more as a pyramid scheme a lot of times, because I think of it as this person shares the gospel with these people who get saved, who then go share the gospel with these people who then... It's a pyramid scheme. It's like LuLaRoe, right? It's like any of these knockoff pyramid scheme companies where, you sell this product and you get all these other people to start selling that product, and you get a commission off of it, and then yada, yada, and it goes all the way down, right? And then it implodes because it's not a system that works. Like I said, my idea of building relationship with people, and now as someone who's not a religious person, I would classify myself as more a spiritual person. My view of building relationships before entering into like the spiritual conversations has paid off so much more. It allows me to be friends with people of all different denominations. It allows me to have conversations with people of all kinds of different walks of life, and like to ask stupid questions, but to be knowledgeable in things that like are interesting and whatever. And we can have relationships that don't revolve around religion. We can have relationships that revolve around our interest in music, our interest in books, our interest in movies, our interest in podcasting, like whatever it is. Like, I could build a relationship on those things. And I think so much of what I saw growing up was building relationship on just Christianity being the thing. And I don't know that that's enough of an interest to really build solid relationships on any longer. So, oh my gosh, I think we made it. Let me see if I have any other notes, any other little tabbies in here. No, that's it. We made it to part 3. The next part is going to be called Building a New Lifestyle. It's going to be a few more chapters. This has been interesting. Doing this series has been so interesting for me because I read this book and I read it a while ago and I really sat with it and I took notes while I read. And then now it's been a reflecting on those notes and figuring out what I really think and feel about those things. And boy, oh boy, I don't know how much got left in, but I definitely can get pretty heated about some of that stuff. I know that getting through the rest of this is going to be tough, and that's part of why I kind of have split them up a little bit, where there's maybe a gap in between. So if you don't like this content and you're just like, I just want the interviews with people, it's okay. That content is going to be coming in between episodes, kind of a palate cleanser, so to speak. But I have so much more to say about this stupid book. And I know that this next section, we're going to start getting into, I think, more of the practical applications of how he sees things like courtship starting to work out and how relationships actually will get formed and things like that. So it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned for that. If you're listening from way in the future and it's already out, just click over to that new episode. But I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate you guys listening to me rant and rave about my experience reading this book and my experience within purity culture and where I am today. And I know that I'm probably not probably. I know that I'm not a perfect person, and I know that I'm continuing to grow. And that's something I want to remain committed to, is growing and evolving and changing and being better as time goes on. And that's why I make stuff like this, because I want to talk about the people that we used to be, the person that I used to be, and how we can change and evolve and be better, and be stronger. And that's not scary, right? It's a good thing. It's a good thing to change. It's a good thing to evolve, and we can allow our thinking to change. We can allow our ideas to change. We can allow our beliefs to change, and it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So, with that being said, one of the great things that came out of episode 1 of this series was that a couple of you reached out to me. You sent me messages on whether it was a DM, whether it was an email, and we talked about things. And I would love that again for this episode. So if you have purity culture stories, if you've got stuff to say about Josh Harris, if you've got stuff to talk about with church drama or just with homeschooling drama or whatever you want to chat about, I want to talk to you. So a couple ways you could do that. Shoot me an email, exhsclub@gmail.com. Shoot me a DM, exhsclub on I'm on TikTok, Threads, Instagram. I think that's about it. But or go down in the show notes and there's links to all that stuff as well. And I want to hear from you. In addition, if you're listening to this, whatever platform, whether you're watching, whether you're listening, whatever you're doing, do all the internet things that you pretty much should already know how to do. Like this episode, leave it a review, leave a comment in the description, share it with a friend, do what you got to do to to get this out to more people. I appreciate that. The show appreciates that. It's so much bigger than I would have ever hoped. We're almost a year in. I think we are a year at this point in to this podcast. And it's been incredible. It's been an incredible journey. I'm so stoked for what's coming down the line. And we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep sharing stories. We're going to keep doing stuff like this, hanging out, getting to know each other. And yeah, all right. Until next time, this has been Jake and peace.